Now joining us for our news panel are David Bacon, labor reporter for KPFA, Carla Marinucci, political reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, and Paul Rogers, environment writer with the San Jose Mercury News. Well, Paul, we finally have a mini water bills, I guess, but some decision was made by the legislature. The governor's now signed on. What is the significance of this major step?
Well, as you note, we've talked about these issues for years, and we'll be talking for years in the future about them. California is essentially an arid state. Most of California gets about 15 inches of rain a year, which is the same amount as Casablanca, Morocco. And 2/3 of the people live in the south, 2/3 of the water is in the north, and that's a recipe for centuries of fighting. What happened this week was we got some of the biggest changes in water policy in California in decades, probably the biggest since the 1960s. But what the legislature passed and what the governor is actually signing today and through the weekend are not going to solve all California's water problems by any stretch of the imagination. I'd basically describe all these bills into two camps. Number one, there's the water bond. This is an $11 billion bond that will go on the ballot in November. It'll be up to the voters to decide whether they want to pass it. It requires a simple majority to pass. It includes $3 billion for new dams, which is something the farmers have wanted for a long time. It includes $1 billion for water recycling, which is something cities like, a couple of $1 billion for river restoration and watersheds, which is something environmentalists like. It became sort of a Christmas tree where everybody's interests were piling on to get a big number. The question is, in a bad economy, will the voters vote to put California further in debt? The second part of the package was a series of policy bills. One that would require all the cities to conserve water by 20% by 2020. One that would require farmers to monitor groundwater, and they've never had to do that before. They pump a lot from the ground. And finally, one that creates a new Delta agency that can start planning for a so-called peripheral canal, although it doesn't approve that canal around the Delta to bring water to the south.
Well, you know, it sounds to me as though the main beneficiaries of this, though, were really the growers. They get the dams, they get the canals. They've been pushing really hard for this for some time. You know, they had demonstrations at Nancy Pelosi's office, at George Miller's office. The teabaggers were out for it. And they walk away from this with a big part of what's under that Christmas tree.
Yeah, that's right, although the voters still have to approve it. And what's going to be interesting about the water bond is I think you're going to see something you don't normally see in parks and water bonds in California, an organized opposition. You're probably going to see the Sierra Club oppose it. You're probably going to see labor unions like the SEIU and maybe the teachers union oppose it because they realize California doesn't have much room left on its credit card, and any amount that we borrow for dams means less for other things.
What about that water bond? Because you mentioned the climate, the political climate, and then there's the climate. I mean, you talked about California being arid. We're in a very wet year, aren't we? How do the voters go out and want to put $11 billion in bonds out there when they're not really seeing a crisis
now,
at
see,
home?
that's a great question, and it's something that I don't even know the politicians think about that much, which is the weather will have a lot to do about whether this bond gets passed. We've had 3 dry years in a row. It hasn't been as severe a drought as we had in the early 1990s, and most people, especially in Northern California, aren't feeling any pain. There aren't water cops driving around. People aren't getting fined if they use too much. They're being asked to voluntarily conserve, but they're not really having to feel it. If we have a 4th year of drought, that increases the chance of passage because people will believe there's a real crisis. But we're supposed to get an El Nino this winter. That's what all the meteorologists are telling us. When we have an El Nino winter, we get a lot of rain, we get flooding. So if the news is full of stories about flooding through April, that's going to make it harder to pass this thing in November.
Well, you often come on this program and you point out to us that cities use 20% of the water,
Correct.
Farmers use 80% of the water. So if the 20% are going to have to conserve and the 80% has no reportable impact that we'll know about anyway, how do we know if this is going to be worth it?
Well, it's a first step in many ways. You know, so for example, on the 20% conservation, there aren't even serious fines for cities that don't meet the 20% goal. And cities like Sacramento and Fresno don't even have water meters on many of the houses. I mean, things that Bay Area have had for decades. And they opposed strict fines. So if you don't meet the 20% goal, what's going to happen is you won't be eligible for state grants and things. The groundwater. Environmentalists wanted strict oversight of the farmers. They wanted fines for people not meeting certain targets. none of that's going to be there. But for the first time, California will start to monitor how much water is coming out of these underground basins, which is a big deal. So it's incremental steps. But yeah, the farmers did not take a big hit on this thing.
It took 30 to 40 years to get here. We only gave you a few minutes, but I think you did a good job in trying to explain it, Paul. Thank you. Let's move on to other political moves, and there were some this week because we did have an election during the week. Carla, tell us about what important happened.
That's right. Well, we saw, of course, back east, the Republicans were crowing that they're back with victories in New Jersey and Virginia, and they're hoping that wave extends to California. But we saw, look, Lieutenant Governor John Garamendi sworn in already, and he may be one of the critical votes on that health care bill Nancy Pelosi is looking at. This is very, very important. While the Republicans were saying that it was an anti-Obama wave, Garamendi ran next to Obama. I mean, he was right there with him and made sure to let his voters know in the 10th Congressional District that Obama supported him. I think that was critical, and the Garamendi move to Washington could be critical when talking about that health care vote. And then we got another development here in California was the entry of Carly Fiorina into the U.S. Senate race, which I think was very, very interesting this week. She's on a 3-day tour, which she ended today in Pleasanton. We saw her come out and make I think, a very bold pitch for that women's vote that has been so there for Barbara Boxer, a breast cancer victim or survivor, I should say, who took off those wigs, said, I am here, I have survived this disease, and I am a fighter. And I think that's a message we have never seen before from a national...
You have to tell us who she is in case somebody's been away for a while.
That's right. A former CEO of Hewlett-Packard is the only woman to ever have run a Fortune 20 at one of the big 20 companies. At the same time, that record is a huge problem for her. She has been named by some groups as one of the 20 worst CEOs in history. She's got layoffs she's going to talk about. She's got a $46 million golden parachute that she left with. But at the same time, her rollout this week, she went right for that women's vote and said, I am a survivor and I know how to throw a punch. And so this could be a very interesting race with Barbara Boxer and Carly Fiorina in it. And it's all going to be about, we saw this with both Fiorina and with Garamendi, it's all back to the economy stupid. This is about jobs, and it's really going to be about where we're at next year. And one last development I think we should say is at Willie Brown's big breakfast this week, we saw Jerry Brown out there, and he is the only Democratic candidate for governor, but not a declared candidate. He said, I'm not a candidate yet, and we may have to wait a couple more months before he is a candidate officially. He still has that target on his back, though, and the Republicans are going to be taking off after him immediately.
Can Carly Fiorina win the Republican primary? There is another Republican in the race. The Republican Party in this state has gotten more conservative. It hasn't grown like the decline to state or the Democrats have. So there's actually a bigger gap. The Democrats start with a larger number of registered voters now than ever before. She's a moderate. She said Sarah Palin wasn't qualified to run a major company. I mean, how does that play?
She said that about a number of people.
Right, but she's trying to get votes in Bakersfield of Republicans. Does that play down there?
Well, remember that 1 out of 5 voters in California is independent voters. Those were crucial in those elections back east, and I think she is hoping that those voters can swing either way, and they're going to swing her way. But you're absolutely right. The presence of Fiorina's the Republican challenger there is Chuck DeVore, an assemblyman, very conservative assemblyman from Southern California, and that's where you got your civil war in the Republican Party. We saw that in New York, the New York Congressional District this week, where the Republicans had to worry about each other going, and we may see that here in California. DeVore is already hitting Carly Fiorina very, very hard. So she's going to get it from 2 flanks, from the Democratic flank and also from the conservative Republican flank.
Now, I want to ask you, Carla, going back to Garamendi's election, it sort of seems to me that this sort of crowns the movement of Contra Costa County to the left. I mean, if you think back 15 years ago, we had 2 conservative Republicans and a liberal Democrat, George Miller. George Miller is still there, but Jerry McNerney replaced Pombo. And now Tauscher replaced Congressman Baker, right?
Right, exactly.
And she was sort of a blue dog Democrat, a conservative Democrat. And now John Garamendi, who is quite a bit more liberal than Tauscher, has replaced her. What's happening in Contra Costa County
Well,
here?
I think you're right. I think some of the demographic changes, David, have made a difference. More Latinos. I think we're seeing that change. But the Republicans did argue this week that Garamendi's win was not as strong as the Democratic registration would suggest there. 18 points advantage in Contra Costa County. He only won by, I think, around 10 points or a little more than that. Yes, I think it has swung. But some of that was due to the redistricting in that area as well. The Republicans certainly hope, and David Harmer, I don't think we've seen the end of him. He was the Republican challenger there. I think we may see him run for office someplace else.
So much political news, we never even got to who Arnold Schwarzenegger might appoint as lieutenant governor next time.
Right, okay.
Well, David Bacon, we're talking about a possible strike hitting all the hotels in San Francisco. We have the first of them in action right now. What's the issue that have kept the two sides so far apart?
Healthcare, medical care. I mean, it's the same strike after strike, dispute after dispute. The hotels want workers in the hotels to pay more for the health care. Right now, for a hotel worker in San Francisco at a Class A hotel, workers don't pay for their health care. The hotels have proposed that they pay $35 this year, $115 next year, $200 the year after that. This is something that I think the union is very unlikely to agree to.
Per month, you mean, right?
Per month,
Yeah.
That's right, per month. So what the union has done is, and these are negotiations that are taking place during economic very bad times right now, and the hotels are saying we don't have any money, and so the union has proposed essentially that the contract be kind of rolled over for another year. In other words, that the existing benefits continue in place, that there be a relatively small wage increase that they say will only cost the hotels about 1.5% more than what they're paying right now, and that the hotels and the union revisit all of these issues a year from now. If the hotels don't agree to that, and I think that it's unlikely that they will, at least right away, what we're likely to see, I think, are strikes at individual hotels. This strike is going to last 3 days. The workers at the Hyatt are going to go back to work on Sunday.
I think the strategy is really interesting, and I haven't quite seen this before. Maybe you can tell us if this is new, but to only hit one hotel, and also to do it, this is really like the lowest tourist season. This is the lowest season for any of these hotels. How effective is that, or what is the strategy in trying that? They're not getting the kind of publicity you get with a citywide strike. So why that strategy?
Well, to begin with, they're negotiating hotel by hotel this time, which is unlike what they did in 2004 to 2006. We remember also that in 2004, the union only struck 4 hotels, and then the hotel industry locked out the whole hotel workforce, which lasted for about 9 weeks. And I think that even the hotels realized at the end that this had sort of backfired on them because the public sympathy was by far in favor of the union. Remember, Mayor Newsom went down to the picket line, and there was a lot of criticism of the hotels for being intransigent there. This time, I think the strategy is to go from one hotel to the next in kind of an escalating series of worker actions and strikes that are designed to increase pressure on the hotels and to kind of force consideration of this one-year proposal that the union has put on the table.
And the hotels make a point, which is affecting all businesses, which is that their healthcare costs have more than doubled. In a bad economy, they're not getting as many tourists, so they're having a hard time paying that. Let me ask you, if Obama is successful in passing healthcare reform, does that mean that we're not going to have as many labor management fights around the country over health care, or how does that affect it?
Well, let me answer that in just a sec. But the first part of your question really is about, is there the money there for this?
It's that they're paying more. I mean,
and one reason why the union chose the Hyatt, for instance, was that the Hyatt had a stock offering the same day that the strike began, in which the Pritzker family that owns the Hyatt chain made about $950 million. A San Francisco hotel worker gets about $30,000 a year. The CEO of the Hyatt chain last year got $6.7 million. So they're trying to dramatize the priorities, in other words, where the money is going here. If there is a a healthcare reform on the order of what the administration has proposed, I think it will take some pressure off of union negotiations over healthcare, but not all of it, because still the question is going to be who is going to pay how much money for the existing private healthcare plans that unions and employers are both
David,
negotiating.
the reason we're talking about this is because this will have a devastating impact on San Francisco, #1 business tourism, if there is an all-city walkout. Do you think that's possible? And what would be the effect? What's the impact? What's the dollar value here?
Well, last year, the hotel business in San Francisco was responsible for $5.3 billion worth of business. So it is definitely the jewel in the crown of the San Francisco economy. There's no question about that. And a strike which shut down the entire industry at one time would have the effect of essentially stopping that revenue stream. But that's not, I think, what the union is doing right now. What the union is doing is striking hotel by hotel. Now, the hotels could do what they did in 2004, which is lock everybody out. But I don't think that that's likely either, Belva, because the hotels aren't negotiating as a unit right now, and they don't have that kind of mutual support pact that was responsible for the lockout last time.
So stay tuned. We don't know what hotel is next.
That's right.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Carla, and thank you, Paul.